the general questions I want to have you all sort of be ruminating on are, do you have any advice for your past selves, especially if maybe like at a time when you were kind of at a crisis point or a difficult decision point or a difficult like sort of a decision inflection in your career? The flip side of that coin is, how did you decide on your specific major or your course of study or your thesis or your focus? And then the last general question I want you all to be thinking about is, how did you decide to connect with Space Grant and with North Carolina Space Grant? What sort of made that magic happen for you? But while you all think about that, some specific questions for the groups. Question for Danyale about your materials here. How do you anticipate these materials will be used for space applications? Or they can be used in astronaut footwear? Can they be used in materials like flooring? Or can you talk to us about some of these other spectra of applications?
Sure. So I believe, of course, auxiliary material does have a very broad spectrum of applications. Specifically for this project, the development of footwear for everyday people affected by neuropathy is the end goal. And then moving forward to implement that product to help astronauts while they're being reacclimated to Earth's gravitational forces, their pull on their muscles and things of that nature, while they're still, being adjusting. And then as far as other applications, I would say the new developments to like the different materials and the vehicles and the spacesuits that are utilized, they're discovered and introduced all the time. So there's been prior research of auxiliary material within like football helmets, protecting, creating a safer environment for the football players as they're crashing into each other. And of course, more research will have to be done when you construct new material and send it out to space because of the different environments that affect those different materials. So we would like to apply the auxiliary material to lots of different things, but more research has to be done to see what is actually viable.
Fantastic. I think so. This question is for Amy. Can you talk about, is there any possibility to kind of cross-reference some of your discoveries or your observations with the TESS or some of the space-based telescopes, or how much sort of crosstalk you do between other telescopes, or are you trying to intentionally focus just on the data produced by every scope?
That's a great question. So I personally tend to focus on data from the Everyscope just because I have access to it. So I might as well use the data since it's there. But it does help. There are planets that, for example, TESS. TESS looks at various star systems for about like 30 days at a time. And so it can find planets with this method. But if you want to find planets that orbit like further out than TESS would be able to detect, well, those are going to take longer orbits. So you have to sit and watch for it longer to see if that planet is going to cause any eclipse timing variations. So by kind of focusing on the Everyscope, that makes it so that I can help out and help find the planets that TESS just can't, or that other telescopes just can't, because they'd have to stare for too long and miss out on other exciting stuff.
Wonderful, that clarifies that wonderfully. Next question is for Hayden. Two-part thing. First of all, can you give us a rough idea of what you mentioned, some cell enlargement there in your lettuce cells when you observe them? Can you give us an idea of what percentage they scaled up by? And then the second question for Hayden is there any particular biosafety or handling procedures you needed to do with the regolith samples that you were experimenting and manipulating?
Yes, so going towards the first question, we didn't I guess we should have, or I guess I didn't really write it down in the PowerPoint, but we didn't really have specific, just in compared to the controls, we could tell that there was definitely cell enlargement on the, but specifically in the lettuce, and I guess it's more because if it's a leafy vegetable or crop in comparison to all the other ones. So I think that's where we saw most of the notability. And then also too, so the first part of the project was actually done by a graduating student named Will Smith, who I've worked with previously. And because the regolith wasn't obviously didn't come from the moon, it's a synthetic regolith that we used, but we still did do all the proper protections and things like that. So we did get in kind of like a hazmat suit type of gear to just protect us in case, you know, there is something in it possibly. But for the most part, yeah, we did. And then we had like I can't think of the name, but the type of masks that you wear, and it kind of has the
respirators. Yeah.
Yes, the respirator mask. We wore those as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next question is for Bryce. Are all the cameras you're using, are those visible light cameras, or was there any hyperspectral or X-ray or other imagery that you're using to cross-reference?
Yeah, currently it's just visual light cameras, just normal black and white high-speed cameras. But in the future, we're also looking into using, instead of physical speckles on the surface, potentially using laser speckles, which can make it fully non-contact inspection.
Excellent. Next question is for Jared. Oh, looks like that may have been already answered in the chat. So we can share that answer around then. Next question is for Leah. So in the video you showed of dragging one of those test pieces along, are those little foam pellets, or what were you practicing with there? And how does does your test environment compare to some of the real life applications for like moving around individual human cells or whatnot? How do those compare to your planned application here?
So in the video, they are polystyrene beads. We can also use like silica beads or just spherical beads that you can trap and test the spectra of. We haven't done any tests with any real applications like cells or anything, but that's like the ultimate goal, I believe, or like to trap things like dust or things in the air, or like things that you would find in space that you would want to take samples and like understand what those samples are. Right now for our solution, we're just doing things that are like easier for the automation process. So right now, all our beads are in water. So the background, they're like a water solution with beads in them. So that's what we're testing with right now.
Fantastic. It looks like Travis has also answered a question off on the side here. Making sure that I haven't touched on any of these other ones. So at this point, I kind of wanted to anyone on the panel who might want to share some of their experiences here. What would you tell to either your past self or someone who would want to follow in your footsteps? How would you steer them to get to where you are today? Would you do that?
I would say my internships with NASA were brought along through, I attended the CIAA Career Fair in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had the opportunity to speak to a representative of NASA, and they're like, definitely just apply. So the simple idea of just applying yourself and not being afraid to open yourself up to something you might not ever think you would have been doing in the first place is how you can land yourself in an amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And yeah, I would say that.
Excellent. Anyone else want to share your thoughts on that particular question? Hayden?
I would say as well, if you plan to go to college or even just high school, like get to know your professors and the professors in your area. So like specifically, I was a biology major, so I tried to make sure I got to know everyone because I have like my professor currently now who helped me get through to the space grant through astrobotany, but then I also have teachers that are working like through cancer biology. So it's just all different types of aspects of different professors, just to get to know each one and maybe even try to like work with them on projects just to find out what you're interested in. And that's really the best way, is connecting with your professors. For me personally.
I see a couple of folks nodding there. It seems like you're not alone in that. I know certain professors have been really elemental and transformative in my own journey here too. One last late-breaking question here for Jared. Can you talk about the cycle of user experience, or sort of capturing those requirements and going back and forth as you're developing your solutions here with your customers? Like, how did you go about, how often were you checking back in and saying, hey, do you like the way this works? Can you sort of talk about that part of experience in brief?
Sure, yeah. So people I was designing this for, and this is an interesting situation, I suppose, where the scientists at GIST, there was obviously a component of like the general public is like able to access this data, but in general, we expected that most of the people who were using this data were going to be scientists doing atmospheric chemistry research. And specifically, it was going to be mostly scientists who are affiliated with either NASA or Columbia University, which is where the lab I was working at is located. So my team that I was working with was 5 full-time NASA employees, 2 of whom were software engineers. They were my mentors, and then 3 of whom were atmospheric chemistry or photonics researchers. And they were sort of the people I would discuss the functionality with. I had usually weekly demos at the end of the week where I would say, okay, these are the new things that I implemented. What do you guys think? Do you have any comments? And then usually every other week, we would do a sort of deeper dive where we really tested out properly what I'd done in is high fidelity a simulator of the research scanning polarimeter in flight as we could manage. So we would actually like run, we obviously didn't have access to the machine itself, the RSP, because I think that's based at Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. And we were remote because of COVID, but we were able to run on the servers and like with real data, the website, all of the functions I'd made to make sure it was meeting the sort of efficiency and memory requirements that needed to be met there. So there was usually every day I would talk with my mentors. Every week I would talk with people who I was designing it for. And then every other week we'd see if we were on the right path.
Great, thank you very much. All right, we have just 2 minutes left, folks. But again, panel, I would love for you to speak to the other students who are tuning in. If the work that these panelists have done sounds exciting, and if other folks want to follow along, how do you connect with Space Grants? How did you all connect? What is there any other advice you have for our audience? Amy, you move first, so I'll put you on the spot.
No, okay, so thinking about, I just typed a response to the question that you asked. So rather than repeat myself, I have been thinking about the kind of advice that you would give to students or your past self or something. And so I kind of have a weird background. I'm a first-generation student, so like I didn't know how academia works because no one in my family had gone through it, and I was also homeschooled, so I didn't know how school worked at all or how one becomes a scientist. And so kind of a huge theme in my whole academic career has been not knowing what I don't know, because if you know what you don't know, you can look up the answers and figure it out. But when you don't even know what you don't know, that's hard. And so what's really helped with that is finding the professors who just are willing to like, let me sit down and just talk with them about stuff, and finding mentors who will take the time and just let me be curious with them, even if that's not someone in my own field. One of my mentors is a chemist, for example, and I used to just kind of live in her office and talk to her about all the stuff I was curious about in chemistry. And so just making those connections and kind of not being afraid to be vulnerable and to admit when you don't know stuff, that really has helped me. I wish I'd started doing that a lot earlier, but that really has helped, because you can't learn if you don't allow yourself to admit that there's stuff that you don't know, which is hard, but you got to. It really helps, and it's worth it.
And again, seeing nods from the panel here, and I know that definitely resonates with my own experience. We are to the end of our Q&A period, Warren. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get to your question offline. Once again, know that there is uproarious applause reaching you all through the internet. So well done. Thanks everyone for presenting today.